Okay, we are live. Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back to our New Year Indie Author Kickoff here on YouTube. I'm Katherine D. Graham, and I am so excited to be doing over 15 different panels with indie fantasy authors to kick off 2023 over the next 3 days. So 15 panels, over 60 authors, and 4 of those authors are here on this epic fantasy live chat. We have Tiger, we have Madam Crystal Butterfly, we have M.H. Woodscourt, and we have Amina. Thank you all so much for joining today. I'm so excited. Some of you I'm meeting for the first time. So we got on, and I was like, oh, I'm so starstruck meeting you. And then Madam Crystal Butterfly, you joined us for last year's, and you come back. So welcome back.
I had to. This is just too much fun.
And Madam's got her own YouTube channel as well that is really rolling. So if you're looking for indie book reviews all year long, you can check out her channel too. Everybody you see here, their links are in the description box. So if you hear about a book that piques your interest, definitely go check those out and drop your questions in the comments on Twitter or here on YouTube. We will answer them during the live. And if you miss the live, that's okay. We're going to still answer questions. If you send any in the replay, I will make sure that the authors get the questions. So with that, Tiger, why don't you kick us off and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your books.
Awesome, Katherine. Well, first off, thank you for having all of us here. This is a privilege to be here with you and with everybody else out there, and Happy New Year's. So thanks. So a little bit about me. My name is Tiger Hebert, and I've been writing epic fantasy for a little over 10 years at this point. And kind of what I like to say, my brand or my tagline is epic fantasy that dares to hope, which maybe ties into that question from the previous stream about dark fantasy. But I'm the author of the Demon Hunters trilogy, and I'm also the author of the Beating Back the Darkness epic fantasy series.
Yes, love that. So Tiger mentioned it. We're going to answer a question a little bit later on about something that came up on the dark fantasy panel. But if you love epic dark fantasy as well as the epic fantasy that we're talking about now, this morning's first panel was about dark epic fantasy, and that is up on replays on YouTube. So Madam Crystal Butterfly, welcome back again. And why don't you let the new viewers know who you are and what you write?
Hello, lovely viewers, and thank you so much, Katherine, again for hosting this panel. It's an honor to be here with such great talent. I am author Madam Crystal Butterfly, and I am the author of the Butterfly Tales series with my 2 entries to that series, the Curse of Frog Prince books, which, I'll get into later about them and other books I have coming up. And I also have my own YouTube channel because as an independent author, I know it's very, very hard to be seen. This is a tough writing game. So I wanted to highlight other indie authors as well. So if you're an indie author and you are having a tough time having your book being seen, just contact me. And if you send me a free copy of your book, I will give you a fair review on my channel.
Yes. And Madam, last year, you and Sky, who's coming up in a different panel later today, issued me a challenge of writing about a frog.
Did you do your homework?
I did the homework. So at the very end of The Godmother that came out this year, there is an epilogue where it shows sort of my retelling of the Frog Prince story with a little Asian influence, because that's just me. And The Godmother's free on my website for people who want to sign up. But thank you for issuing me the challenge, because that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you do realize I have to read that now.
Now that one's a bit darker, so forewarning for people who are here for epic that didn't want dark. It's a dark fantasy.
You've read my book. You know where I'm A-okay with that.
That's right. So MH, for the first time, we meet in person after a lot of time talking on social media. Why don't you let people know about your books and who you are?
All right, so I am M.H. Woodscourt, and it is a privilege to be here, especially with all of this talent. Thank you so much, Katherine, for hosting. I am also an epic high fantasy author. I focus on Noble Bright, which is hopeful. It can go dark places, but it's always going to be good triumphs in the end. So that's my focus. I have actually written 23 novels, but I have published 11 of them. So we're just kind of slowly releasing them as I fix them, because I've been doing it for about 20 years, 21 years. So I'm not saying I was good at it, but that's what I've been doing. I am the author of my debut series is the Paradise Trilogy. I am also the author of the 5-book Record of the Sentinel Seer epic high fantasy science fantasy hybrid series. I have written high fantasy duology, the Wintervale duology, and then a standalone Crownless. And so that's where I am with those. A couple of those have been Amazon bestsellers. So
Congratulations.
thank you. So yeah, that's me.
And her covers are very beautiful. We say you're not supposed to judge people by their covers or books by their covers, but I connected with MH because I saw one of her covers all those years ago. So we were talking about covers a little bit in the first panel, and yes, covers are great.
And it's nice we get to choose our own as indie authors. It's a fun challenge to find the right cover.
That's so true. So, Amina, you're one of my newer writing friends. It is so good to meet you in person. Welcome. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You just released a book.
Yeah. Thank you, Katherine. And like everyone else said, it's an honor to be here. It's great to be recognized as an author, great to be included. And all the books that you're saying, I'm going to probably check out the links as well, and add them to my pile to be read. I have been writing since I was about 10 years old, so I think in the order of 15 years. I have been a published author for the last year. So I just recently celebrated my first anniversary. So my work is, I like to describe it as sort of faith and feminist fantasy, or otherwise a spiritual fantasy. Or if I want to pull out the diversity rep, I say it's a Muslim fantasy. So it's a fantasy that kind of straddles the line between being a cultural representation and being something that, with all my studies, is something that is relatable to whoever tries to read it. So my first book, The Bell Tolling, should hold it this way. So my pride and joy. And this is the book that I say made me a published author for the first time. And with it, my compliment, The Resonant Bell. So these are my first two books. And as Katherine mentioned, I have released another book, which is the anniversary edition. And that cover is here. So
Yay!
All in the same theme of light versus dark, and epic good versus epic evil.
That's amazing.
Happy New Year to everyone. I should add that too.
It's so weird to sit here and go, oh, it's the last day of 2022, because it doesn't feel like the last day of 2022.
Goodbye, 2022.
Last day of the week, last day of the month, last day of the year. It's crazy.
Oh, goodness. So we're going to tie into what Tiger hinted at, which is a question that came up for the Dark Fantasy panel, and I thought would be really great to get input about from the Epic Fantasy. Is ultimately, what's the difference between a dark epic fantasy and a epic or high fantasy? I think in today's culture, with George R.R. Martin and Brandon Sanderson and other authors who might dabble a little bit into the darker side, the two genres often get overlapped, but there's still some very distinct differences between the dark and light. And in the first panel, we mentioned sort of that hope aspect there, Tiger. So because you brought that up, I'm going to let you start, but I also would like to hear what you ladies would think about that, just about what's the difference between epic and dark fantasy.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and I'll try to be quick so everybody else has a chance to share their thoughts. So I also write what we call noble bright fantasy nowadays, and it's kind of interesting because noble bright, even though it's a new or emerging subgenre, at least it's being recognized that way. The reality is, if we look back towards classical fantasy, it's really just harkening back to a lot of the classics. It's getting back to the Tolkiens and the Narnias and the Belgariads, where hope was so vital that there may be darkness, there may be evil in the world. It is that battle of good versus evil. But at the end of the day, it's the hope that the efforts of good matter, and that it's not naive to be honorable or hopeful or have faith. And it's that hope that good does triumph over evil. And so it's interesting in the modern literary scene, what we have witnessed is so much of epic fantasy going towards the grimdark end of the spectrum, that what happened is epic fantasy, the landscape changed. And so it's been so proliferated with the grim dark element that noble bright became like an actual subgenre, which is really just to say, hey, Brandon Sanderson's work, he might not identify it as noble bright, but it is way closer to noble bright than it is Game of Thrones, right? So they're two very different ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely. I mean, I see you nodding a lot. What do you think sort of that difference is?
I really agree with what Tiger said, and it's nice also to hear it being said by someone that the original fantasy is more towards faith, hope. There is uh, a definite pursuit of the heroic archetype. I would also add that one of the big differences between what is now noble bright fantasy and the darker end is heroes that are like worthy of admiration. So they are less morally gray. They are really that sort that you could end the book looking up to that character because you think her or his principles are so well defined, so well written about that you feel inspired to pursue that in your own life. It's sort of the experience of watching Frodo going through the trials of the quest to Mordor and thinking to yourself, I can't do that. I can't do that. But I wish I could. I wish I had that much courage. And it is, I mean, in my opinion, it's a beautiful experience. And that is what that kind of fantasy delivers, that it makes you think that the grim aspects of our world, and there are many grim things in our world, can truly be defeated by courage and perseverance and virtue and wisdom. And it's possible to come out on the end smiling and happy and have happily ever after.
I love that. And Madam, I'm very curious because, like me, you seem to have both aspects in your world. There's the darker sides, but then there's also the lighter sides. What do you feel is that balance?
Well, I won't lie. Over the past couple days, I made a big mistake. I watched a bunch of people breaking down what on earth epic fantasy is, and I can tell you right now, it was a headache watching because people are too darn nitpicky. Did you know we were supposed to be the 10-book quota? But I'm going to go with the main definition. Epic fantasy is, we built the world from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And, it makes the story epic fantasy. So I'm going with that. And I feel like the more you said it was darker fantasy, like you guys were saying, it gets into more of the OG fantasy stories where, oh, you see your world, how happy it is. Well, I'm going to throw something monstrous in it and you're going to have to deal with it and actually learn something while you're dealing with it.
Where they don't have necessarily, there's no good outcome in the end, that even hope is tainted by the potential for darkness.
Yeah, but either way, you have to deal with that hope that you got tainted. You have to get through this dark world where everything's tearing up around you. And I think it's losing my train of thought. I feel like it's good in a way because it shows real life, because in real life stuff just comes at you and you can't always remove it. You have to work around it. And I feel like that's the way you should define that type of fantasy, because like in the real world, you don't fully just get rid of it. Yeah, you have to deal with it. Yeah, you got to try to end it. But you also, for the most part, you've got to work around it. So I really go with their definitions more than mine, but I feel that that's the best way to define it. Also, because my brain is still hurting by listening to a bunch of people the week I used to define it. Because I won't lie, if you watch that, you would have heard the most fickle definition.
So, MH, what's your input on this? Because I know too, I've seen you talk about books that are darker, and I've seen you talk about books that are lighter.
Mm-hmm. So for me, epic fantasy, a lot of it has to do with that definition of that really epic world building. But what I think really does set it apart, and I'm going to lead really into what Tiger and Amina said about it being about, with the noble bright being what I write, it doesn't mean it doesn't go to dark places. It doesn't mean that we don't deal with dark themes and heartbreak and loss and all that stuff. But what we do is we have heroes who work through it as hard as it is, heroes that inspire us. For me, what really sets it apart, if I were to pin it down to one thing for me in my writing, is faith in humanity and what we could be. I get really kind of tired of trashing humans. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of scum people in this world. I'm not going to lie about that. But I also believe that that is a choice that people make, and that we all have the potential to be better than we are, and that we can be incredible, amazing people. And for me, what I try to do in my epic fantasy, and what really sets it apart from the darker, grimdark, I'm talking grimdark fantasy here, what really sets it apart from that is that the hero is somebody that I can aspire to be like, that I can hope my children, if I ever have children, I don't have children, but if I ever have children, like what they could be, aspire to be like. We need heroes. We need characters that we can aspire to be like, instead of focusing on the negative. You turn on the news and it's depressing. You read mainstream books and a lot of them are depressing. And that's what really draws me to fantasy in general, and epic, noble, bright fantasy in particular, is characters who will live through actual hell and make it through somehow, even if it's difficult, and even if they're scarred, and even if they're broken, they're still heroes, and they're still good people with noble souls. And that for me is the defining difference.
Yes, I love that. And it sort of lines up to what the dark fantasy authors were saying on the prior panel, is ultimately both dark and epic have that hope, where grimdark doesn't really have that hope. But the cozier fantasies are focused very heavily on the characters. And as somebody who writes both, that's sort of my delineation for when it's an epic noble bright fantasy and when it's a dark fantasy. The epic fantasy, my character is very different than the characters that are coming out in the dark fantasy series next year, mostly because they are flawed, they are human. They are not necessarily someone you would aspire to be in the beginning. They have to grow into that themselves. And instead of watching a character you could grow into, you have to watch them grow into that person. So it's very great answers. So much wisdom on this panel. So I had another pre-submitted question, and I love this so much because I think it speaks to the indie author community as a whole. Madam and Amina, is it harder to be a self-published writer as a woman or as a person of color, an MH, and obviously you're a woman too, but as a woman or a woman of color compared to traditional publication? Because we know there's a lot of glass doors when pursuing traditional.
So, if I might say something first, one of the reasons that I even thought to begin self-publishing was because I thought, well, the moment I submit my headshot, really, there's going to be judgment on that. And I mean, that was just an expectation in the beginning. What's not as well known is that my first book, The Bell Tolling, is actually published. Sorry, she's very big, so I have to hold it up. It's actually published through a hybrid publisher. Like, I'm showing you the spine. So it's not fully self-published. So not to directly badmouth anyone, but just to say in general, one of the things I experienced was that there was discrimination as a Muslim woman. Like, there were certain things I was just like, would you really say that to anyone else? is that really how you talk to people, or is that how you talk to me because you think you can put me down just because of my faith and where I come from and what I look like? And being like American born, American educated, this was even more frustrating because I was like, I know you don't act like that. It's not like I could delude myself into thinking that's a normal way to act. It's also, I think, something that I think is part of the struggle of marketing as well, that how do I like promote my books when it's when like my image, maybe the images on my books, because they do have a hint of Muslim culture to them. How do I promote those things when they're not the common things, when they are diverse, and like my name, things like that. But at the same time, I would also say that having that much of a diversity representation, like there is the discrimination that happens, but then on the other side, there was this young girl who came up to me and said that meeting you has been the best day of my life, just because I was a Muslim woman who looked like her, who had dared to publish a book in the first place. It didn't matter that it wasn't popular. It was the fact that I had dared to do it and dared to speak about it. And there is also that side of it that, I mean, it's extremely challenging. But then there are, I mean, come on, we're noble right fantasy writers, so we do see this side. There's this great hope and potential for affecting the lives of people who otherwise would not really have a chance to see themselves in published authors and have a voice.
So true. And Madam, what do you think as far as, is it more difficult to get into the self-publishing like it would be for traditional, or do you find that it's not really that different?
I feel like it is more difficult because even with getting into it, there's a double fear. You know, I have the pen name Madam Crystal Butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I came up with my pen name, you know, there was a discussion of whether or not I should show my face, because would I be able to even sell this?
Mm-hmm.
Because even when it's a story with all Black characters, somebody who is white will get more attention than somebody who's Black who writes it. And even within the community, like I had a thing where Amazon actually, I know, has removed a lot of these reviews, but I was getting negative, very hypocritical reviews compulsively. And it felt like it was less of people trying to critique me and more of someone being on a bandwagon. I guess Amazon felt there was something wrong with it because they were very critical with the way I set up my world, because I did it in a fictional African country. And, oh, it's this thing, that thing's wrong with it. And you can tell when somebody's not trying to critique you, they're trying to nitpick you and trying to be harsh with it. But one of the things that motivated me to keep going is when one of my friends called me about my book. Because when she called me, she basically screamed in the phone. I'm like, what did I do? What did I do? And she's like, oh my God. I'm like, oh my God, what? She's like, oh my God. I'm like, what? It's like, she said, I feel seen. Like, this book is just for me, because normally when I read stories like this has none of our culture, nothing that we have in these stories. And she was just so happy. And it made me happy because it made me realize I'm going the right direction with this. I made the right decision, you know, not to try to hide the fact that I'm a Black woman writing a fantasy about Black characters, but the fact that I even had to go through that debate, and even after I published, I did have to deal with some things. I'm not going to get into all of it. Besides, you know, there are things outside of the reviews, but I don't want to get into all of it. I feel that, where am I going with this? I feel that, yes, there is a lot of discrimination. It's not good that I had to have that debate with myself. But if I had that debate, I know a lot of other authors of color have that same debate a lot of times, because when we step into it, it's scary, because it's not just having our work judged. We know other things are going to be coming at us as well.
Yes. And so thank you both so much for sharing, you know, the struggles of this journey. It means the world to me as an author, just to see how you have overcome. And we're going to move on to another question in a second, but I just wanted to say that some of the most inspirational indie authors that I have found have been fellow female writers. Because while I'm inspired by the works of like Tiger and other indie authors, I grew up reading epic fantasies that were almost all by men. And so to see women writers writing fantasy gave me permission to write, and that my story had value. So if you're viewing this as a reader, I hope you feel seen. There are a great number of authors of color and women all over the indie writer community, especially on Instagram. So feel free to follow Madam, follow Almina. Stay tuned on other panels. We're bringing some more people the rest of the weekend too. But being sort of that advocate for telling your friends about these worlds is so important, because the world, like Madam's books, are amazing. Just need to be seen more. So, Tiger and MH, what made you guys sort of decide to self-publish as opposed to going like the traditional route, or have you gone the traditional route for some of your books?
MH, you go first.
Okay. All right. So I was in the trad trenches querying my books for about 15 years. I received a whole lot of rejections. I received a lot of partial and full manuscript requests. And ultimately, everybody passed on it. And then a few years ago, I was given the opportunity to meet in person with a big-time New York agent for a well-known publishing community kind of thing. Anyway, I don't want to say too much because that's irrelevant. But so I got to meet with him, and he got to read my query letter draft that I had for my then present book that I was pushing. And he also got to read the first few pages of my manuscript. It was a drawing. I won it. I was super excited. I was like, this is my breakthrough. I'm going to do it. And, so I sat down with him, and he read my query letter, and he was like, okay, this is what you can work on. This is what's good, And then he sat down and he read the first few pages of my book, and he was quiet for a minute. And then he looked up at me and he said, you're a really good writer. And I was like, but there's a but in here somewhere. And he was like, high fantasy is dead.
Oh.
And I just sat there and I stared at him for a minute, and I was like, dead? And he's like, yeah, it's not as dead as paranormal romance, but it's pretty dead. So give it another 10, 15 years, it may come back and you can try again. And I was like, absolutely not. I refuse to believe that I'm the only person on this planet who's still reading epic and high fantasy. You cannot tell me that this is dead. So I promptly went home and started to do my research. I will admit, I was one of those snobs who absolutely refused to consider indie publishing. I refused to look down that avenue. It was laughable in my head. And then I actually went home after that, and I was so angry, I did my research, and I, open mouth, insert foot. I had to admit that I had been wrong, that indie publishing had made leaps and bounds in the world, that things were totally different from what they'd been in, 2007. And so I had to just sit there and go, okay, now I have an informed opinion, and what can I do about this? And so I took the leap, and I made a bunch of mistakes, and I learned from them, and I made more mistakes, and I learned from them. And honestly, I would never look back. I love it. I love the creative control. I love learning from my mistakes and from growing through it. And I'll never look at trad publishing ever again.
So, Tiger.
Well, if somebody from traditional publishing showed up with a briefcase full of money, I would look at it. I'm not pursuing it either. So my story is a little maybe odd or whatever, but when I first started writing, I had this desire to write a dragon story, like inspired by all the things that I loved for 20 years. And I had no idea what I was doing. I took no courses. I had no education in this area. I was totally ignorant. And I said, hey, blogging is really popular right now. I'm going to create a blog and I'll just write like one chapter at a time. And I just figured I'd get a bunch of viewers to my blog and I'd run ads on the sidebar or something. Like that's how I was going to make my big break. And so I had no outline, nothing, just totally pantsing it. And I don't know, I got to about chapter 5 or 6. And this thing that started out with no clear idea, suddenly I had like the whole book like downloaded. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I thought it was just going to be like a one-shot book, but I was getting feedback from the 5 people that were actually following my blog. They're like, this is really good. Like, you need to do something with this. So I stopped the blog. I actually took the time to start writing and just trying to figure out how to even tell a story. I didn't even know how to do that. 10 years later, I'm not sure if I still do or not, but so I started doing that, and I started exploring publishers, and I found a publishing company. I'll leave their name out of it, but they insisted that they were a traditional / hybrid publisher. They actually were not. It was really a vanity publisher that was not honest, and I totally fell into that trap. And I went down that road. I signed a contract, and things didn't go great, but that's how I got my first book published. And then, I don't know, a year or 2 after it got published, I had to go through the process of actually trying to get my rights to the book back, and had to threaten legal action. And then the company went out of business. Well, I eventually got the rights to the book back. And then this was around the same time, I can't remember the name of it, but Macmillan had a branch that they had released where you could, similar to the draft to digital setup, you could publish through them. And it was like a hybrid approach. I can't remember the name of it, but I went through that because I was like, I'll have the name of Macmillan as the publisher, so it'll add credibility. And they lasted a year before they went under. And so I had to get the rights back. And then I was like, you know what? Heck with all this. I'm just going to self-publish and do it all myself. That way, at least, like, I'm the only one who can go under. Like, I don't have to worry about getting the rights back. So I did that, like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. And I've just been going through it ever since.
Wow. Yeah, it's a lot of work. So if you're watching this as a writer or a reader who's wanting to dabble into writing, self-publishing is not necessarily easier than traditional publishing. They both have their challenges, but they also both have their rewards, more visibility, more connected with the community. Honestly, I believe in. Then also having that control of your work. But I'm also with you, Tiger, that if a big publisher ever showed up at my doorstep and was like, here's X amount for your book, I'd be like, have fun. Here's the book. As long as you don't change who anybody is with. My shipping is as is. But anyway, so speaking of self-publishing and the journey and the working, there's a lot of aspects to the writing and publishing journey. You draft, you have to get your books edited, you have to get the cover designed, you have to prep for publishing. And that's a good segue into what are you going to be working on for 2023? What's in the works this year? So, Amina, why don't you start us off? What do you have going this year?
Okay, so I actually have a bunch of plans. So one thing about me is that I tend to be an ambitious sort in anything. So I published 1 book in 2021, 2 in 2022. One was just a rehash of the previous 2. This next year, I have 5 books planned. So it's a serious uptick in the amount of work and the amount of planning. One of them is more recent. So one of them is a little bit more of a traditional romantic fantasy, at least on the surface. It's very much not so beneath the surface. The other is the sequel to book 1. Like the bell tolling needs a sequel at some points. It's supposed to be the first of 7 books, so the sequel. And then there are a couple of other projects. One thing that I'm also interested in doing this year is switching genres for a specific book. And so this is the next 6 months. So this is the stuff that I have more set in stone. So that's what I'm going to go with for now.
We'll see. It's going to be a big year.
Yeah. We'll see if those other 2 books actually happen this year or not.
You know, the good thing about being indie is the only person that you have deadlines for is yourself. You can take it how it goes.
And I'm more strict with deadlines than pretty much everyone else can be on me. So that's why I'm like, okay, well, let's like keep the revealing to a restrained pace. Like, let me not get ahead of myself.
Oh, so Tiger, what is coming up in 2023 for you? Are you writing, drafting, editing?
Yeah, so I'm still writing. So I'm writing the last novel in the Beating Back the Darkness series, which was the very first series I started. And this will be the fourth novel, and then there's two companion books with that. So this is the sixth book in that series, and it's large even for what I'm accustomed to writing. So my target word count is for that book is about 200,000 words, and I'm around 160,000. But I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I've got little ones, so I'm really busy. So trying to find time to squeeze those words in is always a challenge. But I'm hoping to have the rough draft of the Dark Lights War done maybe by the end of February. That's kind of my goal. But because it's so big, the amount of time it's going to take for revisions and editing and all of that, like I realize it's going to take months to do that and do it well. So that's like my focus. There's a bunch of other fun projects I want to start, but I'm not allowing myself to dip my toe in that water yet.
Yeah, yeah. And Madam, you've got a bunch too because you review books, you help coach authors, you do YouTube, you're writing. What is in the works for 2023?
A whole lot of me being a nut because I've learned from watching that video, which I'm questioning now if I should have watched it because it drove me nuts. Three of my books are considered low fantasy, but they're still fantasy. I have my book Realms the Hidden Fairy coming out, Goblin's Labyrinth, and my story. Well, my brain's wanting to forget my own story, and my story Wedded Bliss. And the high fantasy book I have coming out next year is going to be called The Game of Spades. And that is going to be a book that for a while I'm getting my Patreon set up. I'm going to put that on my Patreon. And one of the big projects I have is something I mentioned to you because I wanted to know whether or not I was going too far and being a little bit of a nut. But it's not a book. It's a virtual concert that I am going to do with the theme music for my books to get more attention to them and see if this can be something indie authors can do to help bring more attention to their books.
Which I love so much. The idea, I mean, I know my husband got a theme song composed for a book he's writing, and I was like, man, that's so creative and everything. I'm not musically gifted at all, but I do enjoy listening.
That's what Fiverr is for.
That's right. Yes. So I'm very excited to see where that goes and everything. You'll have to come back and we'll have to do a special if you end up putting the concert out and talk about how that process was.
I'll let all the indie authors know how to set up their own because if it goes according to plan, this can be a really big thing, help us, the indie community, make more money and give us another really good advertising option. Plus, I got the person who composes the music for me off of Fiverr, and this could lead to even a lot of musicians getting into a whole new area of major work.
Mm-hmm. And as a reader, to have a playlist already made of a series, because I make playlists for like the main books that I love to read, would be great. So MH, you have had so much this past year. It seems like every time I turn around, I was like, is that a new book, a new cover? What are you working on in 2023?
So in 2023, I am focusing on a trilogy I wrote this last year. It is a sequel trilogy to my standalone Crownless, which is a YA high fantasy Noble Bright book. It was meant to just be a standalone. People were like, no, that's not good enough. I want more to this world. And so I sat down and I penned a trilogy only because I came up with a good idea. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done that. But I was very excited to delve back into that. And so the whole thing is written. The first book just got sent off to my beta readers. I've already ordered the cover, concept, So hopefully I'll have a reveal coming up soon. And so I'm just going to be mostly focusing on this trilogy while I'm writing my next series through 2023. And if that goes well, because what I try to do is I try to make sure I don't publish a series until I've actually written the whole thing, because I change my mind all the time. And so I don't want to get myself into trouble. And so I write the whole thing first. And so if I can get the whole of the next series done before the end of the year, I might release more. But focus right now is just the 3 books. And I might even be doing Kickstarter for that, just to fund more expensive covers than I'm accustomed to. And I'm trying to sit okay with that. So that's going on.
Yes, the covers are an investment. They're an investment. When I first did my first 2 books, they flopped. Back when I was just finishing college, and I didn't come back to writing for a long time. But when I did, the consistent advice I got from other authors that were doing this professionally was give yourself enough time to market it, but then also invest in a good cover from a professional designer and invest in editing. And that's really held true. So thank you to all of the cover designers whose books are represented here. And I know a couple authors can design their own, but I'm not one of those people. So we have a couple questions that have come through on social media. We'll talk about those really briefly because we're winding down our time. And then we've got some special projects that each of us has that we wanted to talk about at the end. But if you're watching live, feel free to drop your questions in the comments and I'll pull them up on the screen if you're watching them on YouTube. So the first one is, Madam, do you have any writing courses that you lead?
I am plotting to do that. It's going to be a huge thing with my Patreon. I'm going to be getting a lot of courses and stuff, but I'll get into that more when we're talking about our bigger projects, because that's a lot of stuff that I'm going to be availing from my Patreon.
Mm-hmm. Tiger, are you going to be participating in the science fiction fantasy blog off? Do you know about the SFFBO?
I have in the past. The challenge is I have 2 series, and it has to be a series starter. So I really only have, I've done one before, and then I have another one that I may submit this year. I'm not sure what the dates are for the next round, though.
I don't know. I heard in the first panel there's a lot of people who participate that were on, and I think KE said maybe something about June, but I've never personally participated.
Yeah, I've done it 1 year, and I got really great feedback. It didn't become a finalist or anything like that, but yeah, I only have 1 more book that I can submit for now. So
Well, that's awesome. MH, do you have any free books people can read? I know some authors have free books on their website if you sign up for their newsletter.
I have some free short stories on my newsletter, about 3 of them, and I have some more planned for the new year. And then I don't have free books, but I will have a sale coming up, which I will talk about towards the end of this. So
I'm going to go ahead and make this sort of a wide question. Do you guys have a free book if they sign up for newsletter deal too that people can grab?
Yep.
No, at this time.
I do have bonus stories on my website, and my next upcoming book, I do plan to make free to newsletter subscribers.
Nice.
I do sales like roughly every 6 months or so.
Yeah, and Madam, you want to follow Madam just to get all the tips and the book reviews and everything too on top of her work, because I have found so many great books through her YouTube reviews. Definitely go for that. And of course, I've got The Godmother. I typically leave my free books up for about 6 months and then they're never free again and they get published, and that's that. So The Godmother is up now through the end of June 2023. And that's the one with that frog story. And yeah, and Amina. So you've talked about having 5 books published next year. If somebody was a newer writer, is that something that they should attempt, or do you think they should stick to just the 1 book?
I think it depends on the individual person. I mean, indie publishing is a huge time commitment, and like when I say this, like to give a bit of context, I work 40 hours a week. I am a cybersecurity auditor, so those 40 hours are hours that like I have to work very concentratedly to get my list of projects and assignments done. I also I'm involved in a number of like local community things, so it really is. And then to add like indie publishing on top of that, I mean, it's not a light commitment to make. And I'm only talking about doing these 5 books because I have a lot of prep work for them already done in 2021, and I think it also should be a sign. Like I said that, well, I can't promise those other 2. I'm saying that because of the time commitment, I'm not able to fully say that that's something that I can do, and that is the thing from which I would answer this question. That do what you think you can do. You shouldn't do so much or plan to do so much that you lose sight of the enjoyment of what you're doing. So don't burn yourself out with the thing that's supposed to be your creative expression.
Right. Yes, that's great advice. And then this last one. So this is not an epic. I'm making up new words. Epic romance panel. Epic fantasy romance. I can't even say it. Sorry, guys. Come back in a couple hours for the romance panels. But no, it was seriously. Is there any romance in your books?
Yeah.
Okay, I should add an asterisk to this. There's definitely romance in my books, but in the first book, unless you're actually paying attention, you will not find it. It burns up. It burns very, very slowly into true romance. But for the first book, you really got to go looking. You really have to be paying attention.
For me, there is some elements of it in pretty much just about everything I write, but it's definitely not central to the plot. It's just maybe certain characters have those relationships that happen. But even in the instances where maybe there's forced proximity tropes and maybe enemies to lovers, I still make sure to keep it like not spicy, so it's family friendly.
And Madam, you've got some in yours, right?
You read that hallway scene in my book. You know I got something going on.
Oh man. I think
it's not epic romance, but some stuff gets sizzling. A little too much, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the big difference between epic fantasy non-romance and an epic fantasy romance is one can't exist without the romance. The romance is integral to the plot. So if there is no romance, the story falls apart, is how Katrina Lewis put it last year, which I thought was great. And then epic fantasies can have romance on the side, but personally, most of my books have subtle romantic side plots, with the exception of Splitting Dawn, and the rest are whatever the story calls for. If there's not an opportunity for the romance to develop in a natural speed and natural way, then it's just not in the book. And then MH, I saw you laughing, so I just have to.
I get a lot of flack because I don't seem to put enough romance in my books, but I don't think I'm good at it. I don't write it very well. I'm trying to get better at it, but like I was this person as a teenager. Oh, they're kissing on the movie. Ugh. That was me, and I still feel that way. So it's super awkward for me. I'm just like, ew, no, they're kissing, yuck. So there's not a lot in my books. No, there's some. And I'm trying to get better at it, but I will tell you it's super squeaky clean, family friendly, because, ew, they're kissing.
In all fairness, I learned that romantic scenes, especially when you got people doing the good old devil's tango, is apparently one of the hardest things to write. Because if you write it well, you're not going to please everybody.
That's fair.
I mean, like, this is also like, so I'm a lot like MH. I'm still like, I see like, in even my most favorite movies, like think like Lord of the Rings, like watching like the characters, I'm like, no, why are they doing this? Come on, why? So there is a little bit of like a few kisses here and there, but it's like not integral. It's super squeaky clean. It's like also done in like a committed married relationship because like I mean, I felt like the scene needed that, the characters needed that, but I was just like, okay, but this is not a primary romance for a reason. I mean, it does bubble up, it does come up there, but it's supposed to be extremely super sweet. And I
Yeah.
think like one of those sometimes I think that the little bit of pushback is that but if it's not a true romance, I'm not going to read it. I'm just like there's more to writing and more to fantasy and more to the world than just the romance.
Yeah. And
Here's what we
having
do
that
when they
balance.
complain about the romance. Tell them to go and buy a romance story. We didn't write a romance story. We wrote an epic fantasy story. Stop asking us to do stuff out of our pay grade.
Oh goodness. I think being a woman especially, people will say, "Oh, I don't really read romance." And I was like, "Great, here's this book and this book and this book by indie authors that have no romance." So, but really that's what I love about these panels is because you can come in and say, "I am one of those people that also is like, oh, I don't want to see that." And here you have a panel of authors that you can connect with and say, "Okay, I know that Amina and MH and Tiger and Madam have books where it's not all about the romance. There's some romance on the side, but it's not all about the romance. It's about those heroes and their journeys, as we said earlier, and the inner focus for that specific character or set of characters." So, with the last few minutes of time we've got coming off that romance topic, if you had to say one specific thing that you want to plug for this year, what viewers should be watching for, MH? We're going to start with you.
All right. Well, my Kickstarter. If it comes off the ground. If not, I have a sale going on next week for my birthday. All of the first books in each of my series will be 99 cents a piece. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Happy early birthday.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to you. She's giving her books away for 99 cents.
Because I can.
Oh, goodness. Like, it's my party, and I'll give them if I want to.
That's right.
Oh, Madam, what should people be watching for you this year?
Well, one of the biggest things besides the books I told you I'm releasing next year is going to be my Patreon. To the earlier question about me, whether or not I do writing courses. Originally, I was not, but now that I know how Patreon works and it's a better medium to do it, I am going to be doing things like writing courses, the concert that I had mentioned earlier, and a whole lot of other perks and different things on the Patreon. So be on the lookout for when I launch my Patreon. So because I'm going to have a lot of things that future writers or people who just love books are really going to be wanting to see.
Mm-hmm. Very excited for that. Tiger, what is the one thing people should be looking for in 2023?
Man, I wanna say the work in progress, but I just don't know how long before it's actually going to be done. So I'll say my Demon Hunters trilogy. They can get it as a box set. I think the box set is like $7 or something like that for 600 pages of epic fantasy. It's a completed series. All the loose ends are tied up. They can have a really satisfying experience and really understand if my writing style is a fit for them. If that works for them, then they can look at all the other books that are out there. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Amina, so you've got all these projects for this year. What is the one thing that people should really be looking for?
I think the thing I would probably say is book 2, and it's because with book 2, and I do have a title, but I don't want to announce it yet, just quite. I want to announce it with the cover. I would say book 2 because book 2 is going to be like it's taking me a while to write because precisely because it's a huge level up for my series because it changes a lot of the dynamics. It builds a lot of complexity. And as part of book 2's release, I'm also going to try my hand at things like book boxes.
Mm.
Like combine all that with the release of book 2. Okay, this plug is a little bit weird because everything I've done up to this point in self-publishing, my previous books, the prequel I'll be releasing in a little bit, all of that is going to be part of the huge like explosion of emotion and setting and evil trying to defeat good that happens with book 2. So that is definitely something to watch out for on my end.
Nice. So excited. And then this year, I'm not doing as much just regular noble bright epic fantasy. I'm going into the dark fantasy. I'm publishing a series that I wrote when I was in high school that I've rewritten, re-revised. It's going to rapid release 5 full-length novels in 5 months, starting January 17th with Oracle of Life. So I've got that marked down to 99 cents while it's on pre-order. But so many good books. If you are looking for other epic fantasy authors besides these amazing authors on today's first panel, we are doing 2 young adult epic fantasy panels, one tonight and one tomorrow morning as part of the Blitz, so you can connect with even more authors there. But thank you all so much for helping me kick off 2023, for sharing about your stories, your struggles, your books. I'm so excited to see what comes this year.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you for
having
having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Such a pleasure. Feel free to give all of these authors a follow at the links in the description box. And if you'd like to stay tuned for the next panel, which is starting in about half an hour, fairy tale retellings and mythology, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel and you'll get a notification when it goes live. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Bye.
Happy New Year.